I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I am 67 years old, and until that night I still believed I had raised a decent daughter. Not perfect, not ungrateful, just decent. The kind of person who, even if she disagreed with me, wouldn't slice my dignity open in public. But that illusion died over white linen and red wine, drowned beneath chandeliers and polished silverware. It was a Sunday evening, early September, that moment between seasons when the summer warmth still lingers in the bones of the day, but the air sharpens by evening. The restaurant was perched on the marina, 3 stories of glass and stone that overlooked the water like a lighthouse for people who didn't need saving. Inside, everything glowed. Soft amber light spilled from glass orbs hanging overhead like delicate moons. The tables were dressed in pressed ivory cloths, candles flickering low in heavy crystal holders. Waiters moved like shadows, silent and poised, in crisp white shirts under black waistcoats, each carrying trays balanced like rituals. The scent of seared salmon, lemon butter, and rosemary floated in the air, mixing with the citrus in the hand soap from the restrooms. Every detail was curated for comfort, for charm, for the illusion that nothing painful could ever happen here. I smoothed my navy dress, the one I'd bought 3 years ago for a cousin's wedding, and adjusted the simple silver bracelet my mother had given me decades ago. My hair, more silver than the brown it once was pulled back in a neat bun. I'd taken extra care with my makeup, though I never wore much, just enough to feel put together, to feel worthy of being seen. Everyone was already seated by the time I arrived. My daughter Isabella waved me over to the long table by the window. Outside, the skyline flickered like a scattered jewel box. Boats moved slowly across the harbor, their lights painting silver ripples in the water. I took the seat she had saved beside her. I smiled. I always smiled first. Isabella looked radiant. She'd always had that ability to look put together, not polished like Sophia, but elegant in a way that felt accidental. She wore a pale green wrap dress, the kind that caught the light at the folds. Her hair was pinned up with little gold clips that sparkled every time she turned. She didn't kiss my cheek when I sat down, just tapped the menu and asked, "Have you already eaten today?" I told her no and added, "I brought Brandon a card." My grandson had just turned 19, starting his sophomore year in college. I'd been saving for months to put a decent amount in his card. She didn't respond, just turned her attention to the wine list. I quietly slid the envelope under his water glass. Across from me sat Jose, my ex-husband. Age had caught up to him gently, a little grayer, a little thicker around the middle, but still smug in the way men become when they've never known the word consequence. Beside him was Sophia, the new wife, 10 years younger, sleek bob, eyes like polished glass. She wore red, not burgundy, not wine red, and she laughed with her whole mouth, even when nothing was funny. To her credit, Sophia tried to be charming. She made a comment about how I must be Brandon's grandmother, and when I replied that I was indeed his mother's mother, her face tightened for a breath before smoothing out like fresh icing. Michael, Isabella's husband, was checking his phone under the table, barely acknowledging my arrival. Brandon, my grandson, gave me a quick smile, but then returned to texting someone, his fingers flying across his screen. Isabella laughed too loudly at something Jose said about vacationing in wine country. The waiter poured sparkling water into tall glasses. Ice clinked softly, a delicate civil sound. "So, Maria," Jose said, his voice carrying that slight accent he'd never quite lost. "Still living in that little house on Maple?" "Yes," I answered, unfolding my napkin. "The garden's doing well this year." "You should see our new place," Sophia interjected, her hand landing on Jose's arm possessively. "Jose bought me the most beautiful house overlooking the bay. We have our own private dock." "How nice," I said, meaning it. I'd never begrudged Jose his success, even though he'd been an accountant at a small firm when we were married, and only after our divorce did he climb the corporate ladder. "Brandon, how's your new guitar teacher working out?" Brandon looked up, surprised to be addressed. "Oh, Good, I guess. I haven't gone in like 3 weeks, though. He's too busy with more important things, Isabella said, slightly defensive. His studies come first. I nodded, trying again. And how's work going for you, Isabella? Did that marketing campaign for the hospital launch yet? She answered in fragments, smiles that didn't reach her eyes, always trailing back to her father or Sophia, as though something about me bored her now. It's fine, Dad. Tell Mom about your trip to Aspen last month. I picked at the warm bread on the table, twisting the corner of the napkin in my lap. My back was straight, my voice measured. Inside, though, I felt it, a slow tightening behind my ribs, a familiar sense that I was the afterthought again. Maria, Sophia said, cutting into her appetizer, that bracelet is quaint. Is it vintage? The word vintage fell from her lips like something that might need to be sanitized. It was my mother's, I replied simply. She gave it to me when Isabella was born. Oh, how sweet, Sophia said, her gaze already moving away from me. Jose got me the most gorgeous diamond bracelet for our anniversary. Show her, honey. Jose cleared his throat. I don't think Maria wants to see your jewelry. Sophia, a small kindness, one I hadn't expected from him. Our eyes met briefly across the table, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I'd married 45 years ago, before ambition and discontent had hollowed him out. I tried to keep the conversation going, asked about Brandon's summer trip, his college search, his new guitar teacher. I asked Michael about his new position at the firm, if they'd finally gotten that patio fixed like they'd planned last spring. The waiter returned to take our orders. Jose and Sophia chose the lobster, Isabella and Michael the duck, Brandon the steak, and I selected the salmon. It was the least expensive entree, though I didn't mention that. My teacher's pension only stretched so far, and I was already calculating how much to leave for the tip. While we waited for our food, I found myself watching the boats on the water, their lights like fireflies drifting across the darkness. I remembered taking Isabella on the harbor ferry when she was small, how she'd squealed with delight at the spray of water against her face, how she'd held my hand tightly as we stood at the railing, her small fingers warm and trusting in mine. Where had that girl gone? And then it happened. We were talking about books, or I was trying to. I had mentioned one she loved as a child, the one with the bear and the red scarf. Bruno's Winter, I think it was called. I thought she'd smile, maybe laugh, maybe remember the nights I read it to her when her father was still at work, when she'd curl up against me and ask me to read it again, even when she could already read on her own. But instead, she blinked, stared at her wine, and let out this breathy laugh. Oh my God, Mom, you're so outdated, she said. Seriously, you're like stuck in the 90s. I froze. Not in shock, but in calculation. I waited for her to laugh it off, to say she was joking, but she didn't. She leaned back in her chair, brushed a strand of hair from her temple, and looked at Sophia. Then she said louder, more certain now, "You're a loser. Dad's new wife is incredible." The table went silent. Even the waiter, who had been approaching with a tray of salmon and roast duck, stopped mid-step. Someone at the next table turned slightly. The candle flickered between us. It felt like the air had thickened, like I had to push it away just to breathe. My spine locked. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like something unhooked, but my face didn't move. Not a single muscle. I looked at her. Not with anger, not even with sadness, but with a stillness I didn't know I had. Jose cleared his throat but said nothing. Sophia pretended to adjust her napkin. Brandon sipped his drink. Michael studied the pattern on his plate as if it contained secret code. No one, not one person, said a word in my defense. I sat back. I set down my fork. I looked out the window for a moment, watching a boat slip behind the pier like a secret. I felt the cloth of the chair beneath my palms. I heard the quiet clink of a spoon on porcelain from another table. My throat burned, not from tears, but from the effort of not letting them come. My silence became my shield. I stayed through the main course. I even nodded politely when someone offered me a bite of risotto. But inside I was already gone. I counted every minute until I could leave without causing a scene. When the waiter returned with dessert menus, I excused myself, saying I had an early morning. No one argued. Isabella didn't even look up. I paid for my own meal at the front. The hostess blinked at me, surprised, but took the card without comment. I stepped outside. The night had cooled. The wind smelled of salt and diesel. Across the bay, the skyline shimmered with lights that meant nothing to me. I walked slowly toward the edge of the pier and stood there, arms crossed, watching the water move. What hurt wasn't the insult. It wasn't even the betrayal. It was the silence. The silence of people I had once believed would speak for me. The realization that I had spent decades sewing a life for others, only to be told it was out of fashion. I drove home in silence. No radio, no phone calls. Just the sound of tires on asphalt and my own breathing. The streets were nearly empty. Most people already home with their families. Their Sunday evenings drawing to a close. Streetlights cast pools of yellow on the pavement, and as I drove through them, they illuminated my hands on the steering wheel. Steady despite everything. My little house on Maple Street waited for me, dark except for the porch light I'd left on. The one with the motion sensor that Jose had installed years ago, before he decided our life together wasn't enough. It flickered to life as I pulled into the driveway, a mechanical welcome home. Inside, I moved through the familiar rooms without turning on the lights. I knew every corner, every piece of furniture. The house wasn't fancy 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen with appliances from the early 2000s, but it was mine. Paid off 5 years ago after decades of careful budgeting. I changed into my nightgown, removed my makeup, and brushed my teeth. All the rituals of ending a day, performed as if this were any other night. As if my heart hadn't been cracked open and examined under chandeliers. I didn't sleep that night. Not even for a moment. The house was quiet, but my head was loud. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, where faint shadows from the tree outside danced on the white paint. They moved slowly like ghostly fingers tracing old stories. My room smelled faintly of lavender from the sachet in my dresser, but even that couldn't soothe me. The air felt thick, like it was pressing down on my chest. I kept hearing it in my head, like a needle stuck in a groove. "You're a loser. Dad's new wife is incredible." The words cut deeper each time I remembered them, not because they were true, but because they came from her, my daughter, my only child. I turned onto my side, then my back, then my other side. The sheets were tangled, and the pillow was damp where my hand had rested. I sat up, kicked off the covers, and went to the window. Outside, the sky was a heavy blue just before dawn. The street lamp cast a dull glow over the driveway. Everything looked the same, and nothing felt the same. I walked barefoot into the kitchen. The tile was cold against my feet. The clock on the microwave blinked 4:12 a.m. I put on the kettle out of habit, but when it began to whistle, I turned it off. I didn't want tea. I just didn't want to sit in silence. I sat at the table and stared at my hands, the same hands that had held her as a baby, brushed her hair, buttoned her school shirts, tied her shoes, wiped her tears, held her through breakups, packed her lunches even in college when she came home on weekends. I had done everything I knew how to do, and somehow it wasn't enough. Or maybe it was never appreciated to begin with. That night after the dinner, I had said nothing, not to her, not to anyone. But inside, something shifted, something snapped. It wasn't just about what she said. It was what came before it and what came after it. The years, the choices, the silence. Isabella hadn't humiliated me by accident. It was easy for her, natural. That hurt more than anything. I started remembering moments I had buried, thinking they didn't matter. But they did. Like when she needed money for college. And I emptied my savings, every cent. She said thanks over the phone like she was reading it off a script. A week later, she posted photos from Cancun. Not a word to me. Or when she lost her job after the divorce and moved back in, she stayed in the guest room, left takeout containers on the coffee table, came and went like a guest. I tried to talk to her. She'd say, "Don't start, Mom," and walk away. I was her mother again only when she needed something. I remembered her first car, a silver sedan. She couldn't afford it, so I co-signed, made the first 5 payments while she got back on her feet. She never offered to pay me back. When I once mentioned it, she snapped. "Why do you always keep score?" I didn't. I just remembered. There's a difference. Even when she had her first apartment, I helped her move. I cleaned the bathroom, bought her towels and groceries. She posted a picture of her independence that night. I wasn't in the photo. I wasn't mentioned. And now, after all that, she had looked me in the eye in front of everyone and said I was a loser. I walked into the living room, turned on a small lamp. The warm light hit the old bookshelf. The family pictures. Most of them included her. Isabella at 5 in her Halloween costume. Isabella at 12 holding a science fair ribbon. Isabella at 17 in her prom dress. Me beside her. And everyone smiling proud. I picked up one of the frames. My hand trembled. Where did she go? The girl in the photos. The one who used to run into my arms. Who used to call me her best friend. When did I become the person she was embarrassed by? The hallway clock struck 5. The soft chime echoed. I sat back down, this time on the couch. The cushion sagged slightly under my weight, worn in from years of use. The room was still. The hum of the fridge in the kitchen was the only sound. She hadn't just insulted me. She had erased me publicly, and no one said a word. Jose just sat there, his face unreadable. Sophia smiled politely like none of it concerned her. Michael stared at his plate. Brandon scrolled on his phone. I was alone at that table, surrounded by people. The truth is, I'd been alone for years. I just hadn't seen it clearly until now. The world outside started to brighten. A soft pink glow crept over the houses across the street. I stood and opened the back door. The cool air brushed against my skin. Birds chirped somewhere in the distance. It should have felt peaceful, but all I felt was tired. Tired of being the one who showed up. Tired of being the one who gave. Tired of being the one who was always too sensitive when I got hurt. I went upstairs and pulled out a photo album from the closet. I flipped through it slowly. My hands moved carefully over the pages as if touching those images could bring something back. There was a picture of us at the zoo. She was on my shoulders, laughing. Her small hands tangled in my hair. Another of her in her cap and gown, me hugging her so tight her face was half hidden. Another of a Thanksgiving dinner where she sat across from me, holding up a pie she had baked. I had taught her that recipe. She doesn't remember, but I do. Each memory, once warm, now had an edge, a coldness underneath. Not because they weren't real, but because they were real, and now they were buried under everything she had done since. I closed the album. She had rewritten me in her life, turned me from the mother who gave everything into some outdated figure of pity. But I remembered every sacrifice, every late night, every fear I swallowed so she wouldn't have to. And now I was swallowing my pride again. But for the last time. I stood by the window. The sun was fully up now. The street was quiet, but light spilled across the pavement like a fresh start. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was something worse. I was clear. I finally saw it for what it was. All these years, I thought I was giving her a foundation. She thought it was a stage, and I was never meant to share the spotlight. She had pushed me off at the moment I wasn't useful anymore. But I wasn't gone, and I wasn't finished. I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her validation. I needed my place back in my own life. Not as her background, not as her servant, not as her scapegoat, as myself. And I would get it back, quietly, decisively. 3 mornings passed before I made the decision, not out of impulse, not out of rage, but out of something calmer and far more dangerous clarity. The 3rd morning was the quietest of them all. The neighborhood was still wrapped in a soft mist. the kind that clung gently to tree branches and made the streetlights look like floating halos. I sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in my robe, a ceramic mug warm between my palms. The coffee smelled faintly of hazelnut, my favorite blend. I didn't add sugar. The bitterness suited me. The house around me creaked with age. The floorboards spoke in soft groans, and the fridge let out a tired hum now and then. Outside, the world was slowly waking up. Birds called faintly from the hedges. A dog barked 2 streets over. The scent of dew and damp earth drifted through the open window, mingling with the silence. Isabella's voice echoed again in my mind. That same sentence, like a cut that never stopped stinging. "You're a loser. Dad's new wife is incredible." I closed my eyes, my jaw tensed. She had said it like it was obvious, like it was a fact I should have accepted long ago. But as I sat there, something else occurred to me, something I hadn't thought about in years. What she didn't know, what she had never bothered to notice, was that every dollar she'd saved, every account she claimed as her own, was rooted in something I had quietly built. Long ago, I had opened those accounts. As joint holder, I paid the fees, did the paperwork, updated the passwords. She never read the fine print. She never thought she had to. I stood, walked slowly to the hallway, and opened the closet where I kept my old filing cabinet. It was tucked behind a dusty vacuum and a rolled-up rug I'd been meaning to donate. I pulled the top drawer open and ran my fingers across the tabs. M, Melissa, accounts. The folder was thick. Bank agreements, statements, correspondence. My name in bold on every page, and only my name as the sole owner. I took it all to the dining table, spread it out beneath the chandelier's soft morning glow. The crystals caught the light and cast little patterns on the paperwork. I studied each page carefully. Every detail felt like a thread I was pulling free from a tangled knot. She thought I had nothing left to give. But she forgot one thing. I'd never stopped keeping the house in order. Not even after the divorce. Not even after being forgotten. As I gathered the papers back into their folder, I felt a shift inside me. Not satisfaction, not yet, but purpose. Clear and cold and certain. I made myself another cup of coffee. This time I added cream. I deserved something smooth and sweet after all these years of bitterness. The phone rang. I knew without looking that it would be Isabella, probably calling to check if I was still upset about the dinner. Probably ready with some half-hearted justification. I was just joking. "Mom, you're too sensitive. You always take everything so seriously." I let it ring until it stopped. Then I went upstairs to get dressed. I had an appointment to make. Before I left, I opened the little jewelry box on my dresser and took out my mother's necklace, a simple gold chain with a small sapphire pendant. I fastened it around my neck, the weight of it familiar and comforting. My mother had always told me, "Know your worth, Maria, and don't let anyone make you forget it." I had forgotten for a while, but not anymore. Outside, the day had turned bright and clear. My neighbor Mrs. Thompson was watering her roses, and she waved as I backed out of the driveway. I waved back, smiling. Nobody looking at me would know what I was about to do. That's the thing about women my age, we've learned to carry our revolutions quietly. No banners, no speeches, just decisive action after years of patience. By noon, I had an appointment with the bank. The branch was nestled between a florist and a tailor in an older part of town, where ivy climbed the brick walls and the sidewalks smelled faintly of warm cement and fresh-cut grass. The air was warm and heavy, summer trying to outstay its welcome. Inside, the bank was cool and still, lit by overhead panels that buzzed quietly. The faint scent of paper and cleaning supplies hung in the air. A security guard nodded at me as I entered, and I nodded back, clutching my folder close to my chest like a shield. The banker assigned to me was young, maybe 30. She wore a pale blue blouse and smiled politely, though her eyes held the detached focus of someone trained not to pry. Her nameplate read, Amanda Wilson. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm Amanda. Please, have a seat." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "How can I help you today?" I sat down, smoothing my skirt beneath me, and placed my folder on the desk. I'd like to discuss my accounts, I said, my voice steadier than I had expected. Of course. May I see your ID? I handed her my driver's license, watching as she typed something into her computer. The soft clicking of keys filled the silence between us. Thank you. Now, which accounts were you interested in discussing today? I opened the folder and pulled out the first page, a list of account numbers, all written in my neat handwriting. These, I said simply. I'd like to check on the status of each one and make some changes. She looked at the list, then back at her screen, her eyebrows rising slightly. I see. These are all joint accounts. They appear to be, I said carefully. But I'd like to verify the primary account holder. She typed something else, then turned the monitor slightly so she could see it better. According to our records, you are the primary account holder on all of these accounts. Mrs. Rodriguez, your daughter, Isabella Carter, is listed as a joint holder with rights of survivorship. I nodded, just as I had suspected, just as I had planned, all those years ago, when Isabella was starting college and I wanted to make sure she had access to funds if something happened to me. I had opened the accounts, deposited the initial funds, maintained them diligently. Isabella had only ever used them. She never asked about the paperwork, the origin, the ownership. And as the primary account holder, what rights do I have regarding these accounts? I asked. Amanda hesitated, then answered carefully. As the primary account holder, you have full control over these accounts, including the right to modify access, withdraw funds, or even close the accounts entirely. And what about freezing them? Her eyes met mine, something like understanding flickering across her face. Yes, ma'am, as the account holder, you have every right to freeze or transfer funds. I reached into the folder again and pulled out the request I had prepared at home. Then I'd like to freeze all of these accounts, effective immediately. She took the paper, read it over quickly, and then clicked through her computer, asking a few verification questions. I answered each with a calm voice, even though my pulse fluttered quietly in my throat, not from nerves, from the gravity of the moment. May I ask why you're freezing these accounts? Amanda asked, her voice professional but gentle. I looked at her, really looked at her. Young enough to be my daughter, sitting in her crisp blouse in her climate-controlled office. What would she understand about decades of erosion, about love turning to convenience, about becoming invisible in your own family? Family matters, I said finally, offering nothing more. She nodded, accepting the boundary. I understand. I'll need you to sign these forms. She slid several papers across the desk. This authorizes the freeze on each account. Once processed, no withdrawals or transfers can be made until you personally remove the freeze. I read through each form carefully, aware that this was not a small thing I was doing. This was not a petty response to a single insult. This was reclaiming what was mine, my dignity, my power, my place in the world that Isabella had tried to redefine without my permission. When she slid the final form across the desk, I held the pen for just a second longer than needed. Then I signed. It was done. Is there anything else I can help you with today, Mrs. Rodriguez? Amanda asked, collecting the signed forms. No, I said, gathering my folder. That will be all. Thank you for your time. The freeze will be effective within 24 hours. If you need to make any changes, you can come back in person or call our customer service line. She handed me a business card. I've written my direct extension on the back if you have any questions. I thanked her again and stood. As I turned to leave, she added, Mrs. Rodriguez, take care. There was something in her tone that made me look back. A moment of connection, woman to woman, as if she knew more than she was saying. I nodded once more and left, stepping out into the warm afternoon air. Outside, a light rain had started. I stood under the awning for a moment, watching it soften the edges of the world. It made the sidewalk shimmer. The maple trees across the road swayed gently, their leaves just beginning to turn. The breeze smelled like rain on warm pavement and something faintly floral from the nearby shop. For the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless, at home. I put the documents away and made myself lunch. A simple sandwich, half a peach. I turned on the radio. A soft jazz melody floated through the kitchen. brushing the air with comfort. And then I lit a candle. I sat in the living room with the candle flickering near a photo of Isabella. Age 9, her arms were around my neck in the picture, her cheeks round with childhood. I stared at it for a long time. Where had she gone? She used to sit on the kitchen floor and talk to me for hours. She used to ask for bedtime stories even after she could read. She used to leave sticky notes on the fridge. Love you, Mom. The twist came 2 days later. A letter arrived. It was from Elena, my sister. The handwriting on the envelope was instantly familiar, slanted, neat, full of intention. We hadn't spoken deeply in years, not because of a fight, but because life had pulled us in different directions. She lived in Arizona now, teaching high school Spanish, rarely coming back east. Inside, her words stunned me. Maria, I heard about the dinner. Cousin Anita called me. She saw you at the restaurant and witnessed what happened. I wish I had been there for you. I remember when Dad told you to be quiet at dinner, that you were the plain one, that you should just be useful. I never forgot that night, but I think you did. You turned that shame into love. You raised a daughter who forgot how to be grateful. But you never stopped giving. I'm writing to remind you of something. You are not defined by how others see you. Not even your daughter. Especially not your daughter. It's time to remember the woman you were before you became everyone's foundation. Remember the girl who wanted to paint, to travel, to stand tall. Call me. Please, it's been too long. All my love. Elena, my eyes burned. I set the letter down on the table and folded my hands tightly in my lap. She was right. It wasn't just about Isabella. It was about a lifetime of being taught to make myself small, to be the one who stepped aside, to give until there was nothing left to give. But I had finally drawn a line. Not with a fight, with a signature. Isabella hadn't called yet. She wouldn't notice right away. That's how far removed she was from the actual management of her finances. Michael handled most of it, I suspected, and even he probably had automatic payments set up for everything. But when she did notice when the notifications came, when the card declined, when the numbers didn't add up, she would panic. She'd call, and I would answer. Not to gloat, not to explain, but to make something clear. It was never about the money. It was about respect. And after decades of giving it away, I had finally chosen to give it to myself. I picked up the phone and dialed Elena's number. It was time to reconnect with the people who saw me clearly. The phone started ringing at 7:16 in the morning. I remember the exact time because I had just sat down at the kitchen table with my first cup of tea. Steam curled slowly from the mug, dancing upward in the golden light that spilled in through the window blinds. Outside, the air was tinted a soft orange, the sky clear but not yet blue. Birds chirped nearby, and somewhere down the street, a sprinkler clicked rhythmically against dry grass. It was Isabella. I didn't answer. She called again 2 minutes later, then again at 7:22 and again at 7:26. The fourth time, I picked up. "Mom!" she shouted before I could even say hello. Her voice was loud, strained, brittle, like glass about to shatter. "My cards aren't working. The bank says they're frozen. What's going on? Did something happen? Did you hear anything?" Her tone wasn't one of confusion. It was panic. Immediate, unfiltered panic, like a person who'd been handed a reality they never imagined possible. I took a calm sip of tea, let the warmth rest on my tongue, then swallowed slowly. "You called me a loser," I said, my voice even, quiet. "Now you know who actually held control." There was silence on the line, not even a breath. I could almost hear her mind stalling, trying to fill in the gaps, trying to pull up every memory, every signature she never paid attention to. "You can't be serious," she finally said. Her voice was lower now, shaky, not angry yet, just stunned. "That money is mine." "Legally," I replied. "It never was." "You have no right." I didn't bother answering that. I simply ended the call. The air in the kitchen felt lighter somehow. I leaned back in the chair and looked out the window. The neighbor's cat was curled up on their porch step, sunbathing lazily. A slight breeze rattled the leaves in the maple tree, and the smell of damp soil wafted in through the screen. That was the beginning of the unraveling. By noon, she had called 6 more times. No voicemails, just missed calls, lined up like dominoes on my screen. She followed up with a series of texts, frantic, then furious, then strangely formal. "What are you doing? You can't do this. I needed that for bills. Rent is due. You don't understand what this is causing. Please." Each one sat on my screen, glowing like little sparks. I didn't answer. By evening, Jose sent a message. "What did you do?" No greeting, no emotion, just a challenge. His name lighting up my phone felt like an echo from a version of myself I no longer recognized. The next morning, I opened my email and saw a message from Sophia. "Maria, I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. These things can become messy quickly. Isabella is very upset. For everyone's sake, perhaps we can discuss this calmly and restore harmony. Best, Sophia, restore harmony." The phrase sat like a rock in my stomach. Where was harmony when Isabella looked me in the eye and called me worthless in front of a room of people? Where was calm when I was left in silence, surrounded by people who should have spoken up for me? Michael called next. He left a voicemail, then another. "Maria, this is getting serious," he said in the third one. "We have bills, payments. We need access to those funds. She says you froze everything. We don't understand why you would do this." His tone was polite at first, but there was frustration beneath it, tension, then panic. "We were supposed to fly out next week. All of it is booked. Flights, hotels." Flights, of course. They had planned a trip. Greece, if I remembered right. Isabella had mentioned it offhandedly weeks ago. "Oh, we just needed a break." That break was now canceled. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the one holding the broken pieces. I felt peace because I remembered. I remembered how she laughed at Sophia's jokes that night, smiling too wide, too eager. I remembered how she looked at me like I was a relic, something to be dusted off and hidden. I remembered the way her tone changed when she was around her father, that subtle, sharp edge that came out only when I was in the room. And I remembered every moment after when no one, not one person, came to my defense. So no, I felt no guilt. No need to explain. No desire to comfort. That day I baked a small tray of lemon bars. The scent of citrus and butter filled the house, and I opened the kitchen window to let the breeze in. The sky outside had cleared completely, a pale blue stretching overhead. The wind danced with the curtains, and the radio played an old jazz standard that made the moment feel timeless. Melissa came to the house 2 days later. I saw her car pull up from my spot on the living room couch. She stepped out quickly, clearly flustered. She wore a long beige coat and sunglasses. Though it was cloudy that morning, her heels clicked sharply against the walkway. She stood at the door but didn't knock, just stood there, arms crossed, staring. Her jaw was set, her whole posture tight. For a moment, I wondered if she would break down, if she'd knock or cry or say something, but she turned and left. She reminded me so much of Jose in that moment, that same quiet entitlement, that belief that the world owed her, that any closed door was an insult. I watched her drive off, then returned to my tea. That evening, the sunset was a blend of soft pink and gold glowing across the tops of the trees. I took my tea out to the porch, wrapped in a shawl, and watched the neighborhood settle into twilight. The children down the street rode their bikes one last time before dinner. A neighbor walked his dog past my fence and waved. I waved back. The silence I kept wasn't cold. It was mine. They kept trying to paint me as angry, as emotional, as out of control. But the truth was I was calm, grounded, clear. This wasn't punishment. This wasn't revenge. This was balance. I had spent decades giving more than I received, filling silence with generosity, swallowing pain for the sake of peace, smiling through disrespect and calling it love. Now I was just returning the silence. Isabella sent me a long message on the 4th day. "Mom, I know you're hurt, but this is going too far. Family doesn't punish each other like this. We love each other, even when we make mistakes. Can't we just talk about this?" I stared at the message for a long time, Family. That word so easily thrown around when it suited her. But where was that family when I sat at that restaurant table humiliated? Where was that love when she rolled her eyes at me every time I spoke? Where was that understanding when I gave and gave and gave and was still considered not enough? I didn't reply. Sometimes the only answer left is silence. I had watched her disrespect me for years, and now I had stopped watching, stopped waiting, stopped explaining. Let her feel the quiet. Let her wonder, because sometimes silence speaks louder than apologies. And for once in my life, I wanted to hear my own voice again, even if no one else could. Even if it only said one thing. Enough. It started with a message from someone I didn't expect. Not Isabella, not Jose, not even Sophia. It was a young woman named Lucy Williams, someone I barely remembered from Isabella's university years. She had been Isabella's roommate during her sophomore semester. Quiet, soft-spoken. I had only met her once, briefly, when I dropped off groceries during finals week. Her message was short, typed late at night. Mrs. Rodriguez, I know we haven't spoken in years, but I just wanted to say thank you. I never told you how much it meant when you brought me soup that winter I was sick. You didn't know, but I had no family nearby. I still remember how kind you were. You made me feel like I mattered. Lucy Williams. I read that message 3 times. It was a whisper from the past, a moment I barely remembered that had clearly mattered to someone else more than I ever realized. A small act, unnoticed by my own daughter, had become someone else's memory of warmth. I didn't cry, but I felt something settle in me, like a loose puzzle piece clicking into place. A reminder that just because someone close to you refuses to see you doesn't mean you're invisible. I typed back a simple reply. Thank you for remembering. Lucy, it means more than you know. But the family didn't let up. Isabella started posting online. Subtle at first. Vague quotes about loyalty and being betrayed by those who should protect you. Photos of her looking away from the camera. Eyes shaded. Captions like, "Sometimes we grow beyond those who raised us." I didn't comment. I didn't respond. A few mutual friends reached out. One asked if I was okay. Another gently mentioned how things seem tense right now, and maybe it would help if I just apologized, even if you didn't mean it. That last message made something cold slide down my spine, because that's how it had always been. Me apologizing, even when I was the one holding the pieces together, even when I was the one cleaning up their messes, even when I was the one quietly bleeding so no one else had to get their hands dirty. Not anymore. Then the doorbell started ringing. Isabella came once more, stood on the porch for 10 minutes, and knocked loudly. I didn't move from the couch. I didn't peek through the curtains. She texted me from the steps. I know you're home. This is cruel. This is manipulation. I didn't reply. 2 days later, Jose showed up. His car, still the same old BMW, pulled into the driveway like he had a right to be there. He didn't get out, just sat behind the wheel for several minutes. Then he reversed and left. It didn't matter. They were circling because they felt the shift. Because for the first time in their lives, I wasn't holding the door open. I was holding it shut. Not out of bitterness, not out of revenge, but because I had finally realized that silence wasn't weakness. It was space. And I had filled that space with myself. I returned to my routines. I bought fresh flowers every Sunday, just for me. I cooked proper meals, not just toast or leftovers. I listened to the kind of music I used to love when I was younger, before motherhood consumed every second of the day. I even started painting again, something I hadn't done since Isabella was in high school. The house smelled like citrus and linen. The light shifted with the seasons. I opened the windows more often. My world became smaller, but richer. The letters from the bank came weekly now. Confirmations, updates, quiet reminders of what I had taken back into my own hands. Isabella sent a birthday card. It came late. The handwriting was rushed. The message short. Hope you're well. I placed it in a drawer, not out of malice. I just didn't want it on the mantel. She hadn't called since. Sometimes I wondered if she was hoping I would reach out, that I would cave, that I would ask to meet or send money or say the words she needed to feel righteous again. But I didn't. I had said all I needed to without speaking at all. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of every boundary I never set, full of the worth I had finally started assigning to myself. One afternoon, I passed by a neighbor's yard sale. On a folding table sat a collection of old photo frames. One of them had a quote in cursive, slightly faded, "You don't have to be loud to be heard." I bought it. It sits by my front door now, not as a message to others, but as a reminder to myself. While going through old boxes in the attic, searching for more painting supplies, I found something unexpected, a small leather-bound journal with Isabella's name embossed on the cover. I remembered giving it to her for her 16th birthday, but I didn't know she'd kept it. I certainly didn't know it was in my attic. I hesitated before opening it. This was her private writing, after all. But something told me it was important, that it might help me understand what had happened to the girl who once held my hand so tightly. The first entries were typical teenage concerns: boys, friends, school. But about halfway through, the tone changed. December 12th, 1999, Dad left again tonight. Another business trip. Mom pretends like it's normal, but I heard them fighting. She was crying after he left. Why doesn't she ever stand up for herself? Why does she just let him walk all over her? It makes me so angry. I wish she would fight back. I wish she wasn't so weak. My breath caught. I kept reading, page after page of Isabella's teenage perspective on my marriage, on my life, on me. May 3rd, 2000, Dad called today. He's in California with some woman from his office. Mom doesn't know, or at least she pretends not to. It's pathetic. I swear I will never be like her. I'll never let a man treat me that way. I'll never be that. Desperate. I closed the journal, my hands shaking. All these years, I thought I was showing Isabella strength. I thought I was teaching her how to endure, how to keep a family together despite the cracks. But what she saw was submission. What she saw was weakness. She didn't despise me because I was outdated or uncool. She despised me because she thought I had allowed myself to be a victim. And in her eyes, becoming like me was the worst thing that could happen to her. The irony was bitter. In trying to protect her from the pain of our broken family, I had inadvertently taught her the wrong lesson entirely. And now, she was married to Michael, a man who reminded me so much of Jose it was sometimes frightening. The cycle was repeating, but she couldn't see it. I returned the journal to the box but kept this new understanding close to my heart. It didn't excuse what Isabella had done, but it explained so much about who she had become. That night, I called Elena again. When I told her about the journal, she was quiet for a long time. "You did what you thought was right, Maria," she finally said. "You tried to shield her from the ugly truth, but children see more than we think. They absorb the unsaid things." "I never wanted her to think I was weak," I whispered. "You weren't weak. You were trapped. There's a difference. And now you've found your way out. The question is, will Isabella ever find hers?" I didn't have an answer for that, but for the first time, I felt something other than hurt when I thought about my daughter. I felt sad for her. Sad that she had misunderstood my silence for weakness. Sad that she was still fighting demons she didn't recognize. But that didn't mean I was ready to open the door. Some lessons need time to be learned, and some boundaries, once established, need to be honored before they can be redrawn. The next day, I got in my car and drove to the art supply store. I bought new canvases, brushes, paints and colors I'd never tried before. I set them up in the spare room, the one that used to be Isabella's. I opened the windows wide, letting the fresh air sweep away the staleness of unused space. And then I painted. Not the careful, muted landscapes I used to create, but bold, vibrant swirls of color that spoke of everything I had never said aloud. I painted until my arms ached and the light faded from the sky. When I stepped back to look at what I had created, I saw not just color and form, but the shape of my own liberation. It wasn't beautiful in any traditional sense, but it was honest, and that, I realized, was what had been missing from my life for so long. Honesty, with others, but most importantly, with myself. A month had passed since I'd frozen the accounts. The days had grown shorter, the light softer. Autumn had settled fully into the neighborhood, painting the trees in shades of amber and gold. I found a rhythm in my new solitude morning walks, afternoon painting, evening reading. I took my camera out of storage, the old Nikon Jose had given me for our 10th anniversary, and began photographing the changing landscape. For the first time in years, I was living for myself. I bought the groceries I wanted, cooked the meals that pleased me, slept in when I felt like it, and stayed up late watching foreign films with subtitles that Jose had always complained about. The silence of the house no longer felt empty. It felt like possibility. I had spoken with Elena twice a week since her letter, rebuilding the bridge between us. She was planning to visit for Thanksgiving, the first holiday we would spend together in over a decade. "Are you going to invite Isabella?" she asked during our last call. "I don't know," I admitted. "She hasn't reached out, not really. Just demands and accusations." "What would it take," Elena asked, "for you to be ready to talk to her?" I considered the question carefully. "An acknowledgement," I said finally. Not just of what she said at dinner, but of all of it. The years of taking without giving, the disrespect, the erasure. I need her to see me. Elena, really see me. And if she doesn't, then I keep walking my own path. I said simply, "I'm done waiting in the wings of someone else's life." The doorbell rang on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the kitchen, hands deep in bread dough, the counter dusted with flour. I wiped my hands on my apron and peered through the window. 2 cars were parked in my driveway, Isabella's silver Audi and Jose's BMW. My heart stumbled for a moment, then righted itself. I hadn't expected them to arrive together. It felt like an ambush, and perhaps it was. But I was no longer the woman who could be cornered easily. I washed my hands, removed the apron, and smoothed my hair. I didn't rush. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. Let them wait. I had waited for decades. When I finally opened the door, they stood like awkward bookends on my porch. Isabella to the left, Jose to the right, a careful distance between them. My daughter looked thinner, her face taut with stress. Her clothing was still impeccable, a camel coat over dark jeans, but her eyes had the hollow look of someone who wasn't sleeping well. Jose seemed older somehow, the lines around his mouth deeper than I remembered. "Mom," Isabella started, her voice pitched somewhere between demand and plea. "We need to talk." I looked between them, then stepped back, holding the door open. "Come in." They followed me into the living room. Isabella paused briefly, her eyes catching on the new paintings I'd hung on the walls, colorful abstracts that replaced the bland landscapes that had been there for years. "You're painting again?" she said, surprise evident in her voice. "Yes." She seemed about to say something else, but stopped herself. Jose stood awkwardly near the fireplace, hands in his pockets, like a visitor in a museum unsure of where to look. "Sit," I said, gesturing to the couch. I took the armchair opposite, folding my hands in my lap. I had nothing to hide, nothing to prove. I simply waited. Isabella sat perched on the edge of the couch, her back straight, her purse clutched in her lap like a shield. Jose sat beside her, keeping that same careful distance. "Mom, this has gone on long enough," Isabella began. "You've made your point. Whatever I said that upset you, I'm sorry. But you need to unfreeze those accounts. Michael and I have payments due. We had to cancel our trip to Greece. Brandon's tuition payment is coming up." I looked at her, really looked at her. My beautiful daughter, who had my chin in Jose's eyes, who once climbed trees in a yellow dress and came home covered in mud and laughter. Now she sat in my living room, still not understanding what this was about. "What did you say that upset me?" I asked quietly. "Do you remember?" She blinked, thrown by the question. At dinner, I might have said something rude. I was stressed about work and— "You called your mother a loser," Jose interrupted, his voice low. "You said Sophia was incredible compared to her. Isabella's face flushed. I didn't mean it like that. I was just, you meant it exactly like that, I said, my voice steady. But this isn't just about that night, Isabella. It's about years of disrespect, years of taking without giving, years of making me feel like I only mattered when I could be useful to you. That's not fair, she protested. I appreciate everything you've done for me. When, I asked simply, when have you shown that appreciation? When have you called just to check on me, not to ask for something? When have you defended me when others dismissed me? When have you treated me like a person with value beyond what I can provide? The room fell silent. Even the clock on the mantel seemed to hold its breath. Outside, a car drove past, the sound distant and unconnected to the tension in the room. I found your old journal, I said after a moment. The one from high school. Isabella went very still, her knuckles white where she gripped her purse. You wrote that I was weak, that I let your father walk all over me, that you would never be like me. Jose shifted uncomfortably, his gaze fixed on the floor. You were a teenager, I continued. You didn't understand what was happening. You didn't see the choices I was making to keep our family intact, to give you stability, to protect you from the truth. What truth? Isabella asked, her voice barely audible. I looked at Jose, who finally raised his eyes to meet mine. There was something like regret there, mixed with fear. Tell her, I said. Tell her where you really were on those business trips. Tell her about the women, the money you spent, the lies you told. Tell her why I stayed silent all those years. Jose's face drained of color. Maria? No, I said firmly. No more secrets. No more protecting people who don't deserve it. Tell her, or I will. He took a deep breath, his shoulders sagging under the weight of decades of deception. I was unfaithful, he said finally, the words falling into the room like stones. Many times, over many years. Your mother knew, at least some of it. She stayed because of you, because she wanted you to have a father, a family. Because in our culture, in our generation, that's what women did. They endured. Isabella's eyes widened, darting between us. But you always said I lied, Jose admitted. And your mother covered for me. She never told you about the money I gambled away, about the nights I didn't come home, about the pain I caused. She never wanted you to think less of me, to lose respect for your father. She carried that burden alone. And I let her. Tears welled in Isabella's eyes, spilling silently down her cheeks. Why didn't you tell me? Because you idolized him, I said simply. Because I thought it would hurt you more to know. Because I believed that giving you a whole father, even a flawed, absent one, was better than revealing the truth. I was wrong. You weren't weak, Isabella whispered, realization dawning on her face. You were protecting me. I was doing what I thought was right, I said. But in shielding you, I taught you the wrong lesson. You saw submission where there was sacrifice. You saw weakness where there was love. And now you're repeating the pattern without even knowing it. What do you mean? Her voice trembled. Michael, I said gently, he's not Jose, but there are echoes. The way he checks out when things get difficult. The way you try too hard to please him, to be perfect. The way you've slowly made yourself smaller to fit his expectations. Isabella's breath caught, a soft, wounded sound. Her hands fell open in her lap, the purse forgotten. How do you? Because I lived it, I said. And because I see you, Isabella, I've always seen you, even when you stopped seeing me. The silence that followed wasn't empty or cold. It was full of truth, long buried but finally unearthed. The three of us sat in its presence, letting it settle around us like dust after an explosion. Finally, Jose spoke. I'm sorry, Maria, for all of it, for making you carry my shame, for letting Isabella believe you were less than you are, for not standing up for you at that dinner. I looked at him, this man I had once loved enough to build a life around. There was no hatred in me anymore, just a quiet certainty that we had both been shaped by forces larger than ourselves: culture, expectation, the narrow definitions of what men and women should be. "I didn't freeze those accounts to punish you, Isabella," I said, turning back to my daughter. "I did it because it was the only language you seemed to understand, the only way to make you see me as something other than a convenience." She wiped her eyes, makeup smearing across her cheekbone. For once, she didn't try to fix it. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now," I told her. "Just think. Really think about the woman you're becoming and whether that's who you want to be. Think about the marriage you're building and whether it nourishes your spirit or diminishes it. Think about how you treat the people who love you, especially when they can't give you what you want." Jose stood up, hands still in his pockets. "I should go. This is between the two of you now." He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at me. "You deserved better, Maria. You always did." After he left, Isabella and I sat in silence for several minutes. I could hear the clock ticking, the distant sound of children playing outside, the soft creak of the house settling around us. "The accounts," she finally said, her voice small. "Are they really all in your name?" I nodded. "I opened them when you started college. I wanted you to have access if something happened to me. But I never gave you ownership. And all this time, I thought—" "You thought what most people think when they don't read the fine print," I said, not unkindly. "That possession is the same as ownership." She looked around the living room again, taking in the new paintings, the fresh flowers, the books stacked on the coffee table, signs of a life being reclaimed. "You seem different." "I am different," I agreed. "I've remembered who I was before I became everyone's foundation." She stood, smoothing her coat with trembling hands. "I should go. I need to think about everything." I walked her to the door, neither of us speaking. On the threshold, she turned back, her face uncertain, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child. "Will you ever unfreeze the accounts?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "when I believe you see their true value, and mine." She nodded once, understanding flickering across her face. Then she was gone, the door closing softly behind her. I returned to the kitchen, to my bread dough that had risen while truths were revealed. I pushed my hands into it, feeling the living elasticity, the potential, like my life now moldable, full of possibility, ready to be shaped into something nourishing. The confrontation with Jose and Isabella left me drained but strangely peaceful. It was as if speaking those long-held truths had released something knotted inside me, allowing me to breathe more deeply. I didn't expect immediate transformation. Decades of patterns don't dissolve in a single afternoon of honesty. But I had planted seeds in Isabella's mind, in my own heart that might, with time and care, grow into something new. The next day dawned clear and cool. I took my coffee to the back porch, wrapped in a cardigan against the morning chill. The garden was preparing for winter, the rose bushes pruned back, the vegetable beds cleared and covered with straw. I had always loved this in-between time, the quiet pause before winter's stillness. My phone chimed with a text from Elena. "How are you feeling after yesterday?" I had called her immediately after Isabella and Jose left, needing to share the weight of what had happened. She had listened, asked gentle questions, held space for my complicated emotions. Lighter, I texted back. "Like I've set down something I've been carrying too long." Her response came quickly. "Proud of you, Hermana. It takes courage to speak truth, especially to those we love." I smiled, feeling the warmth of her words despite the physical distance between us. Having her back in my life was an unexpected gift of this difficult time. The doorbell rang around 11. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment, I tensed, wondering if Jose or Isabella had returned. But when I opened the door, it was Isabella alone, standing there with an old photo album clutched to her chest. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice subdued. I nodded, stepping aside. She looked different today, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, jeans and a sweater, minimal makeup, less armor. She followed me to the living room, where we sat in the same places as yesterday. She placed the album on the coffee table between us. "I found this at home last night," she said. "I couldn't sleep after everything, so I started going through old boxes. I recognized the album, pale blue leather, slightly worn at the corners. Your baby book." "Yes." She opened it carefully. The first page held a hospital bracelet, tiny and white, with Baby Girl Rodriguez printed in fading ink. "I forgot I had this. Michael wanted me to throw out all the old junk when we moved last year." I said nothing, watching as she turned the pages slowly. Her birth certificate, a lock of dark hair from her first haircut, a photograph of her, red-faced and swaddled, in my arms. My face in that picture was exhausted but radiant with a fierce, protective love. "You kept everything," she murmured, fingers tracing the outline of a small handprint pressed in blue paint. "My first day of school, my report cards, the ticket stubs from my first concert." Yes, she continued through the album, past her childhood and into teenage years. Prom photos, graduation, college acceptance letters, each page a careful documentation of a life unfolding. "There's so much I didn't remember," she said, voice thick. "Like this." She pointed to a photograph of the two of us, heads bent together over a science project, a papier-mâché volcano. "You stayed up all night helping me finish this when I procrastinated. You had work the next day, but you never complained. You got an A," I recalled. "The volcano erupted perfectly." She turned another page. "And this, a birthday party. Isabella at 10, surrounded by friends, a cake shaped like a guitar in front of her. You made that cake from scratch. I told all my friends my mom was the best baker in the world. You wanted to be a rock star that year." I smiled at the memory. "You played air guitar in the living room for hours." She closed the album, hands resting on its cover. I was looking at these pictures, and I kept thinking, where did that girl go? The one who thought her mom hung the moon? When did I start seeing you as less? It was the question I'd been asking myself for years. Hearing it from her lips made my chest tighten. "I think," I said carefully, "it happened gradually, when you saw how your father treated me, when you began to value what he valued: success, appearance, status. When you married Michael, who reinforced those same values. And maybe when I let you believe that my worth was tied to what I could give you, not who I was." She was quiet for a long moment. "After you left the restaurant that night," Sophia laughed. She said, "Well, that was awkward." And I laughed too. I actually laughed. Her face crumpled with shame at the memory. "Dad didn't say anything. Brandon asked if you were okay, and I told him you were just being dramatic, that you'd get over it." The admission hurt, but not as much as I expected, perhaps because I already knew, deep down, how easily they had dismissed me. "When you froze the accounts," Isabella continued, "I was furious. I called Michael, screaming about how you had no right. He called his lawyer. We were going to sue you." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "The lawyer told us we had no case, that the accounts were legally yours, that you had every right to do what you did. And that made you angry," I guessed. "At first, yes." She twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit she'd had since the day Michael placed it on her finger. "But then I was just confused. If you had all this control, why didn't you ever use it before? Why did you let me treat you that way?" It was a profound question, one that cut to the heart of everything. Because I thought loving you meant putting you first. Always. Because I was raised to believe that a mother's value was in her sacrifice. Because I didn't know how to love you and myself at the same time. Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I've been horrible to you." "Yes," I sassy said, not to punish her, but because the truth mattered now more than comfort. "You have been, but you're here now, looking at these memories, asking these questions. That's a beginning." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a childlike gesture that reminded me of the little girl who once skinned her knees and came running to me for bandages and kisses. "What happens now? That depends on you," I said, I've made my choice. I'm not going back to being invisible, to being valued only for what I can give. I'm not going to pretend that disrespect is love. And the accounts will remain frozen until I see real change. Not words, Isabella. Actions. She nodded slowly, accepting this boundary even though I could see it made her uncomfortable. Michael is angry. He doesn't understand any of this. He says I should cut ties with you if you won't be reasonable. The statement hung in the air between us, its implications clear. She was being asked to choose. What do you want, Isabella? I asked. Not what Michael wants, not what your father wants, not what I want. What do you want? She looked surprised by the question, as if no one had asked her that in a very long time. Perhaps no one had. I don't know, she admitted after a long pause. I've spent so long trying to be what everyone else wanted. Perfect wife. Perfect daughter, at least to Dad. Perfect mother to Brandon. She looked down at her hands. I'm not sure I know who I am without all that. I felt a rush of recognition so powerful it almost took my breath away. My daughter, for all her outward confidence, was lost in the same maze of expectations that had trapped me for decades. Then maybe that's where you start, I suggested gently. Finding out who Isabella is, beneath all those roles. She gathered the album, holding it against her chest again. Can I borrow this for a while? I want to look at it more. Remember? Of course. At the door, she hesitated. Mom, thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on you. It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was acknowledgement, and for now, that was enough. After she left, I sat on the porch swing, pushing gently with my foot, letting the rhythmic movement soothe me. A neighbor walked by with a golden retriever, waving as they passed. The October sun bathed everything in a warm, honeyed light. I thought about the album Isabella had taken, about the careful record I had kept of her life. How strange that these physical memories had been what finally cracked open the door between us. Not the grand gestures or the dramatic confrontations, but the quiet evidence of a love that had documented every milestone, preserved every precious moment. Perhaps that was the truest form of love, not the sacrifice or the silence, but the witnessing, the seeing and being seen, completely and honestly, across time and change and disappointment. I didn't know if Isabella and I would ever fully heal the rift between us. Some wounds leave permanent scars, reminders of where we've been hurt and how we've healed. But for the first time in months, I felt a cautious hope unfurling inside me, not for a perfect reconciliation, but for something new and honest to grow from the broken ground of our past. 6 months later, spring had returned to Maple Street. My garden was alive with new growth tulips pushing through the soil, the cherry tree heavy with pink blossoms, the vegetable beds freshly turned and ready for planting. My life had bloomed in unexpected ways as well. I joined an art class at the community center, where my bold, emotional paintings had attracted attention. The instructor, a retired art professor named Claire, had encouraged me to display my work in the center's spring exhibition. To my surprise, I'd sold 3 pieces. Elena had visited for 2 weeks in April, filling the house with Spanish music and the scent of our mother's recipes. We'd stayed up late talking, reclaiming the closeness of our childhood, making plans for her to move back east when she retired next year. I'd even started dating, cautiously. Nothing serious: coffee with a widower from my painting class, dinner with a retired English teacher Elena had introduced me to. Small steps into a social world I'd forgotten existed. The changes in Isabella had been more gradual, more tentative. After our conversation with the photo album, she'd kept her distance for several weeks. Then, just before Christmas, she'd called and asked if she could come over. Alone, she arrived with a small, wrapped gift in an envelope. The gift was a watercolor set, professional grade. I remembered you used to paint, she'd said. Before, everything. The envelope contained a letter, 3 handwritten pages of memories, apologies, and promises. Not empty ones about being a better daughter, but specific commitments, weekly phone calls, monthly dinners, respect for my boundaries, honesty about her own struggles with Michael. who was resistant to the changes she was trying to make. We'd started slowly. Phone calls that were awkward at first, then gradually more natural. Coffee at a neutral cafe. Eventually, dinners at my house. Just the two of us, relearning how to be together without the old patterns of giving and taking. I'd unfrozen one of the accounts in February, as a gesture of acknowledgement for her efforts. The others remained under my control, a boundary that she now understood and respected. Today, we had plans to meet at a small Italian restaurant downtown. It would be our first dinner out in public since that fateful night at the Marina restaurant. A full-circle moment, though at a different establishment, one without painful associations. I dressed carefully, not to impress, but to honor the occasion. A deep blue dress that brought out my eyes. Silver earrings that Elena had given me for Christmas. Comfortable but elegant shoes. My hair, now fully silver, was styled in a way that embraced rather than hid its natural texture. At 67, I no longer felt the need to apologize for taking up space, for showing my age, for being exactly who I was. The restaurant was warm and inviting, with brick walls and soft lighting. Isabella was already seated when I arrived, checking her watch nervously. She stood when she saw me, awkward for a moment before leaning in for a brief hug. "You look beautiful, Mom," she said, and I could hear the sincerity in her voice. "Thank you." I sat across from her, placing my napkin in my lap. "How's Brandon doing with his new apartment?" She smiled, genuine pride lighting her face. "Good, he's actually cooking for himself now, if you can believe it. He asked me for your pasta sauce recipe last week. I'd be happy to teach him myself, if he'd like." "He'd love that," she hesitated. "He misses you. He's been asking when he can come see you." Brandon and I had always had a special bond, one that had been collateral damage in the rift between his mother and me. "He's welcome anytime, you know that." The waiter came to take our orders, risotto for me, pasta for Isabella. When he left, she took a deep breath, as if preparing herself for something difficult. "I have news," she said, fingers nervously tracing the stem of her water glass. "Michael and I are separating." I kept my expression neutral, though inside I felt a complex mix of emotions: concern for her pain, relief that she was freeing herself from a relationship that diminished her, worry about what would come next. "It's been coming for a while," she continued, "even before everything with us. But these past months, as I've been working on myself, on being more authentic, the problems became impossible to ignore." "How are you feeling about it?" I asked, careful not to express judgment or premature approval. "Scared," she admitted. "Sad, relieved, all of it at once. We're doing counseling, trying to figure out if there's anything to save. But I don't think there is." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I don't want to spend the rest of my life being someone I'm not, just to keep a marriage that makes me smaller." The words were so familiar, so close to what I had felt all those decades ago with Jose, that my throat tightened. But unlike me, Isabella was finding the courage to walk away before a lifetime had passed. "Whatever happens," I said, reaching across the table to cover her hand with mine, "you won't face it alone, not unless you want to." She turned her palm up, squeezing my hand. "Thank you. That means everything." Our food arrived, steam rising from the plates, the aroma of garlic and herbs filling the air between us. We ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. "I saw Dad last week," Isabella said eventually. "He's different lately, more reflective. He actually apologized for how he treated you, and for encouraging me to see you as less than you are." I nodded, unsurprised. Jose had sent me a letter around New Year's, a formal, somewhat stiff apology, but sincere in its way. People can change if they choose to. "Even at our age?" she asked, a hint of her old humor surfacing. "Especially at our age," I replied, "when we finally realize that time isn't endless, and that how we live matters more than what we accumulate." After dinner, we walked together along the waterfront, not the same marina where everything had fractured, but a smaller, quieter stretch of harbor. Boats bobbed gently in their slips, their lights reflecting in the dark water. The spring air was cool, but not cold, carrying the scent of salt and possibility. "I've been thinking about going back to school," Isabella said as we walked. "I always wanted to study art history, before I got caught up in marketing because Dad said it was more practical." "It's never too late," I told her. "Look at me selling paintings at 67, she smiled, tucking her arm through mine in a gesture that felt both new and familiar. "You're my inspiration. You know, watching you reclaim yourself these past months. It's given me courage." We stopped at a bench overlooking the water and sat, content to simply be together in the gathering twilight. Stars were beginning to appear overhead, faint at first, then more distinct as darkness deepened. "Do you remember," Isabella asked softly, "when you used to take me to the planetarium? You knew all the constellations, all the stories behind them." "I remember," I said, surprised that she did. Those trips had been before the divorce, before everything changed. "You loved Orion the best. The hunter," she nodded. "I can still find him in the sky." She paused, looking up at the emerging stars. "I wish I had appreciated those moments more, all the small things you did that I took for granted." "We can't go back," I said gently. "But we can go forward differently." She nodded, understanding what I meant. This wasn't about erasing the past or pretending the hurt hadn't happened. It was about building something new on the foundation of truth we'd finally established. "Will you have dinner with Brandon and me next Sunday?" she asked. "Nothing fancy, just at my house. He's been asking, and I thought it would be nice. The three of us. I'd like that," I said, meaning it. Later, driving home, I felt a sense of peace settling over me like a comfortable blanket, not the false peace of silence and sacrifice, but something truer and more durable, the peace that comes from standing in your own truth, from being seen and acknowledged, from loving without losing yourself. My house welcomed me home, warm and familiar. I moved through the rooms, turning on lamps, feeling the presence of my own life in every corner, the paintings on the walls, the books on the shelves, the flowers in vases, all reflections of a woman who had finally remembered her own name. In the kitchen, I made a cup of tea and carried it to the back porch. The night was clear, the stars bright above the silhouettes of trees. I sat in the swing, gently rocking, listening to the night sounds, crickets, a distant dog barking, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. I thought about the journey of the past year, from that painful dinner to this quiet, content moment, about how sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for others is to draw a line, to say no more, to demand the respect you deserve. Isabella and I were finding our way to a new relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than obligation and expectation. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, old patterns that tried to reassert themselves, but we were both committed to this new path, this honest way of being together. As for me, I was no longer anyone's doormat, no longer invisible, no longer defined solely by what I could give. I was Maria Rodriguez, artist, mother, sister, friend, a woman who had learned, at 67, that it's never too late to reclaim your dignity, to remember your worth, to stand tall in your own life. The silent dignity I had found wasn't in suffering quietly or in dramatic confrontation. It was in the quiet certainty of knowing my own value, in the peaceful assertion of healthy boundaries, in the gentle but firm refusal to be less than I was. I sipped my tea, watching the stars, content in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys. And whatever came, I would face it as myself, whole, strong, and finally free. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below and let me know the city you're watching from. I also have 2 other stories that are channel favorites if you're interested in hearing more.